Hey songwriters, welcome back to part 2 of our Songwriter Roundtable. We started part 1 by talking about how to write songs and some advice for new songwriters. We're going to continue this conversation now with part 2, where we talk about the craft of songwriting and the craft of storytelling in songwriting. So let's jump back in. So one of the things that people will say to me, and I've had different conversations, I think personally with some of you guys, but you know, I teach a lot of craft and I teach a lot of tools, and some people think they're rules, but in the end, there's actually no rules to songwriting. Like, how do you guys feel about, like, if somebody comes and says, well, you can't learn how to write a great song, like you just either write it or you have it or you don't have it. Like, how do you guys sort of like reconcile the craft with the sort of inspiration side? Do you know what I mean?
There's a great, when John Mayer was at Berklee College of Music doing a lecture, and he dives right into that idea, and he says, you know, music theory and all the stuff that you're learning here, all of that is just pure information, and the task for you is then to find a way to use that information to serve your inspiration. You know, you can write a song that's on a technical level doing all these incredible things, and it may be really, really good, but we all know full well that some of the best songs ever are so plain, and they seem so simple because it's not. Again, it comes back to that emotional thing, right? When a song really delivers for us on that level, it doesn't matter if they've used the most simple approach to writing or the most complex, but the whole craft and getting better, the mastery of the tools and techniques is just knowing that, you know, you can dial up the technicality, you can dial down the technicality, but doing those things on purpose is what real creativity comes down to. If you did it just because that's the only way you can do it, that's not necessarily creative. That's just, you know, what's necessary for you to get it out at all. So I think, yeah, I don't know. It's easy to get caught up once we start learning stuff and kind of go off the rails. But sometimes the simplest application of the principle is the most effective. And just knowing when it is and when it isn't is kind of the skill of the writer.
Sure.
I think it's the nice to have that toolkit in your background, so you've got, you know, those things to rely on. But I really think that the essence of the songwriting is probably coming up and breaking those rules and coming up with something completely new. And that's, in my experience, is what's been catching people.
Yeah. Do you find that in your own writing, Greg?
Yeah, I've, in fact, right now I'm working on a few little things. I mentioned this mandolin. When I use that mandolin, I come up with a whole different type of a melody. And one of the other things I've been trying to do is write shorter songs. So they come in and hit and are gone. And, you know, you know, my Spotify thing looks like, you know, I've got 35 listeners and they've probably listened once this year, or I don't know how many times, but I'm having fun with it, and I'm playing with the theories.
No, well, Greg's point about like writing shorter songs, I heard somebody say the other day that giving yourself limitations, like just say like you have to, your verse is only 4 like lines, right? Like kind of this like minimalism in writing, like writing shorter, I think is a good exercise because it sort of makes you cut out the BS, right? Like if you only have so much time or so much space, you really have to get to the point. Like Greg said, he like hits it early. That's really cool advice.
I just finished recording a song here a couple hours ago, and I posted on alonetone.com. So if you guys are ever looking for a place to get some feedback, alonetone.com. It's completely free, and it's kind of a fun place. But I posted this song. It's 2 minutes and 40 seconds. And I thought, you know, that worked pretty good. As I listened to it, I realized I heard it, it was over, and I was happy with it.
Awesome. That's really cool. Sarah.
Yeah, I think the limiting idea is great too. When I had a song coach quite a while ago, and one of her things was write a 16-word song, and I was like, write a what? Like, but it was really fun and like super challenging to be that succinct, like to try to figure out exactly what you want to say and shut up about the rest because if you like words, you like words, and I like words, so like I'm always trying to say too much. But yeah, one of the things that I think too is kind of cool as a songwriter and as aspiring songwriters out there is that only you can write from your perspective. Only you have walked your journey. You have every single one of us has a very unique perspective that only we can give. And so doing it right or wrong, I mean, your voice is important because you're the only one that can use it, like nobody else can use your voice. And so don't be afraid of it, I guess. So, your voice has value too. And I think that's just a really cool thing about songwriting is that any two people that come into a room and co-write, like their story will be different ultimately because the perspectives initially are just so different. And the experiences are different. That's what makes it so cool.
Yeah, no, the excellent point for sure. Nabil.
To your original question, I remember when I wrote my first song and how protective I was of it for the next 2 years after that, and how these tools that you're talking about felt like they were threatening what I had written, and I had to let go of my ego to actually get to the point where I go like, okay, no, I need to be able to write 10 songs in a week, which means that one song that I wrote means nothing, and they need to be better than that one song that I wrote. And then those tools become less of an enemy and more of a friend. By the way, I think the same thing about music theory. That happened to me with music theory as well. I need to, learn to let go things, and that's how I learned to let go things. Like I thought, hey, I know these 4 chords. What else is there to music theory, beyond these 4 chords? Like I know everything. I can write a song on these. And then somebody introduces me to modes, and I go like, brain gone. Like I am, from that high seat back to like, I know nothing. Let me start over, So that's a part of the process of letting. I still remember that first song, and I can tell you, that's not a good song anymore.
Well, that's your growth, right? Though, because you can see that it wasn't as good as you can do. That's awesome, Patrick.
Yeah, there's a lot of really whimsical ways to get in trouble in this world, but you can write whatever song you want. If you don't want to write to certain rules, don't write to those rules. But maybe a really good way to think about these things that we learn, rhyme schemes or line lengths or song organization, is that there's a reason why these things work, and finding ways to make them into things that convey your point or the emotions that you're trying to present. That's kind of the trick here. So if you write a song that seems to navigate around every single possible conceivable guideline, but it still accomplishes the job that you want it to do, what does it matter? As long as if you wrote the song and you like it and you're happy with it, just be happy with it. I don't know. I run into this a lot because a lot of my favorite artists, they're a bit more freeform than some of the stuff that we talk about, and they get away with it. Now, maybe someone can talk about why they get away with it. Someone knows why, they can do what they do. But I think the point is just these are meant to be helpful guidelines, and people will break them, and they will do their own thing. Why not? Just go for it. Yeah.
Well, I think going back to the cooking analogy, right? Like, do you use every single utensil you have in your kitchen for every meal? No, you have certain things that you pull out, and different spices to use when you need it. And I think that's what these tools are. And I think and we've talked about this before, like you're making these decisions about these tools, whether you know it consciously or not. Like you're going to have some sort of rhyme scheme or not. Even if you said, I'm not rhyming, that's your rhyme scheme, is you don't have one, right? So the idea is, how do you make it support the emotional center of what you're singing about and what the song is about from an emotional standpoint? And I think that's something that a lot of songwriters miss, is they write about a situation when the song isn't about the situation, it's about the emotion with underneath that situation. So it's kind of like the theme that's underneath the plot, sort of a thing, I guess is a way to look at it. Neil.
I'm sorry. Can I leapfrog a couple people there? I'm so sorry.
Yeah, go for it.
Because I'll tell you why. There's a lot of support here for breaking the rules, and that's great. If you're a great songwriter and you've learned the rules, and if you're an artist and you've established a career and you've got fans and you can break those rules and come up with songs that people love, I think it's wonderful. But to the beginning songwriters, it is, in my opinion, it is critical to learn the rules before you start breaking a bunch of rules. I think, and we see it. I'm involved with a lot of songwriting groups, and you see these people who've been writing songs for 6 months and they got 3 songs under the belt, and there's no sense at all to what's going on in their song. The structure is all out of whack. The rhyming is perfect. And they will get support within their groups. Hey, the rules are made to be broken. I don't agree with that. And I think rules need to be learned first. You really do need to spend some time going to workshops, talking to professional songwriters, talking to artists, listening, reading Pat Patterson's books and listening and reading articles by Marty Dodson. And learn how things are done and then start breaking the rules. I think you really do need to learn them first.
I do totally agree with you, by the way, Chuck. I wasn't suggesting that people shouldn't. But I suppose I was just saying, if you want to write a particular song, write it. But I totally agree. Learn the rules, because otherwise you don't have a structure to what you're doing. It can be super helpful for that.
I think the aha moment I had earlier, and I didn't say it, but Sarah had said something, and it goes along the lines of this. I think what's important that you should break the rules is what you're writing about, right? Like your perspective is how you break the rules, not the structure of it. Like don't throw the structure out. Write something cool from a content perspective that breaks the rules. Like write from a perspective that nobody writes from, instead of like bashing like tools. Like I see it in my workshops where people, it's like they just argue with everything you say, like you talk about things and they're like, well, Pink Floyd didn't do that on some like album track that came out and no one ever heard on the radio, right? Like, it's like, that's fine. Music is music, but you must want to learn something because you're in a workshop, right? And I think that's the thing, is like, learn how the tools and the rules can support your interesting perspective.
It's about using or not using a particular rule or tool with intention, rather than just being like willy-nilly about everything. I feel like, if you're breaking a rule just to be like, oh, I don't want to rhyme this line, and that's like a really poor reason to do that. But if you're like, no, this is the most honest way I can express what I need to say, and I don't care what principle I'm using or not using, that authenticity is more powerful. That should be the guiding force in the long run. Because to the point a bunch of us have made, right? Like, anything you're going to do, Chad, you were saying it, like anything you do in songwriting, you're still using the principle. It's just a question of, are you kind of leaning toward orthodoxy or like maybe leaning away from it a little bit?
It's a little bit like a novelist saying like, screw the alphabet. I'm not using the freaking alphabet. Like, you can't teach me how to write words.
So here's a middle ground perspective.
Okay.
I think rules are important too. And it's good to have capital letters and periods when you're writing a novel because it's easier to read. I mean, that just helps. But I don't want beginning songwriters to think they need to know all the rules before they start. Because
True.
I don't know if any of us ever know all the rules. I mean, I'm constantly learning every time. Every bad song I write, I learn something from. I don't think I've ever written a song that I haven't learned something about songwriting from. So I think you learn a principle, you apply it, you learn from that experience, and then you go on. And if you can keep learning and building to that toolkit, it certainly makes you a better craftsperson in the long run. But I don't think not knowing all the rules should be a barrier to getting going.
No, and I think the point is not so much like not knowing the rules, but there's some people that don't want to learn anything else. And I think they think that songs just are like gifted to people, because you hear artists say that, right? Like, I didn't write it, I channeled it. Yeah, but you also wrote 10,000 other songs over the course of your life that led to that moment, right? Like, it wasn't like that just came out of nowhere. I guess that's kind of my point. And for me, I love the rule stuff. Like, give me the rules. Neil.
Yeah, there's a lot of great comments here, a lot to unpack in this question. Of course, it's something we grapple with all the time. I think what you just alluded to, Chad, or even said straight out, is that part of the problem is that people, especially beginning songwriters or general population who aren't songwriters, they hear stuff on the radio, on Spotify, they hear the finished product. They never hear the 17 versions of that song that came before it. And yes, we do hear stories from songwriters that say, yeah, it just kind of, it came to me. And that's entirely possible. And some of the best songs I've wrote in 2 hours, not the ones that I labored over for months. Those are certainly not the best ones. But you're right, Chad, in that you've got lots of experience before you, writing songs every day or for many years before you can write a song very, very quickly and intuitively. Like you've said this before, Chad, on your channel and stuff. Like, you do it on purpose until you end up doing it by accident. Right. I'm a big fan of Malcolm Gladwell, and his book Outliers. He talks about the 10,000 hour rule, especially the Beatles, how they practiced their butts off before they got popular, and they honed their chops and really figured out how to do it before they got successful at it. And the flip side to that is he also wrote a book called Blink, where he talks about art forgery, for example, how art experts can look at a forgery and then in an instant, in a blink of an eye, they know it's a forgery. They can't tell you exactly how they know, but they've just got, they've got that 10,000 hours of experience behind them, so that their intuition actually does kick in and it works for them. And the way I like to see it for myself is that, like, I used to make decisions in my songwriting that maybe were poor decisions and I'd have to revise them. Now I make a decision, a split second decision, and it kind of, it works almost right away because I'm getting better at it. Right. And as far as like music theory and stuff like that is concerned, like I always tell songwriters, whether you intend to use it or not, it's there. And we can study other songwriters and pull their ideas from them. Even if they didn't intend to, they're still using the music theory, they're still using the rhyme schemes, they're still using all those tools, and they're there for us to discover. Here in Canada, there was a songwriter named Tal Bachman. He was Randy Bachman's son, of Turner, Bach Turner Overdrive, whatever, taking care of business. And his son, Tal Bachman, released a single in 1989 called She's So High. And I saw I saw a video clip of him talking on a panel. And he basically said that he studied every hit Beatles song and analyzed them to death, like almost like he put it through a computer, except his brain was the computer, where he studied the melodies. How many measures was it before they got to the next hook? Where was the pre-chorus? Where was the chorus? And he basically just took that as a template and wrote a hit song. And it's a great song, She's So High by Tal Bachman. It's an amazing piece of thing. But when you hear him talk about how he constructed it, he just studied the crap out of a bunch of Beatles songs and put this together at his thing. So he was using the tools. I have no doubt about it.
But he also had a famous dad, so that's a good tool too.
He also had a famous dad, and sure enough, there are many unpopular songwriters who are fantastic. But yeah, but they, as Paul was saying, like the measured point is that you don't have to know absolutely everything. We had a guest on the podcast a few years ago. His name is Jacob Moon. He's a singer-songwriter from Hamilton, Ontario. Incredible musician, and he did this thing at the end of his chorus, the last chorus, where it sounded like he put a little twist on the end of the chorus and it sounded different than his other choruses. And we were like, let's look at that a little more closely. Let's see what you did there. And he talked about this thing called reharmonization. He's saying exactly the same melody, but he reharmonized the chords underneath it. He even demonstrated on his guitar during our podcast. Like, here's the major version, here's the minor version, right?
Cool.
And I was like, that's brilliant. It sounds so cool. It adds this little twist to the end of the song and it works so well. I'm going to try that. I tried it and I failed completely. Like, it didn't have the same magic that he had. So I don't know exactly what he did, but it's one of those things where you study the tool and then you try to apply it yourself. Sometimes it doesn't work, but you put it in the back of your mind. I'm still want to try it on another song one of these days and see if I can get it to work. But it's just another tool in your toolbox that you can pull out. And like Richard was saying, if you do it with intention, if you're going to break the rule, if you're going to do it unconventional structure, then your narrative has to warrant it. You have to have a reason for going against the grain, or even going with the grain and saying I'm going to do a completely conventional song because of whatever. I can't even think of a reason why I would do that. But yeah, that's all I have for now.
Yeah, I was just thinking about the whole tools, no tools, whatever thing. I love tools because I really am a believer that knowledge is power. Like, the things you can do with it, everything you learn, I mean, you don't have to use them. But if you know them and you get stuck somewhere along the way, you've got all sorts of things to go, why isn't that working right there? Why don't I like this line? Oh, because the rhythm is the same as it's been for 6 lines, like nothing's changed or whatever it might be. Like, I just think that is really like a sense of perpetual curiosity will get you so much further than trying to fight whatever rules may or may not exist. Like a sense of perpetual curiosity and humbleness, because I mean, nobody knows it all. Like, there's always more learning to do. That's why longtime songwriters still take workshops, because they still learn stuff. They still grow. And, so if you can be humble that, my song is one I'm attached to, but also I know I can grow from this. Like, and honestly, I don't hand out many of the songs that I'm super duper attached to. For like, if I know that they're a personal baby of mine, I keep them. But but in general, most of my songs can be hashed, and I've gotten to the point where I don't feel like it's brutal anymore, but it takes a while. But like to be humble, and if you're new to songwriting, if you can find somebody who can mentor you along the way and guide you and show you what you need to know, or maybe say, have you thought of this, like, to help you grow? Like, I think that's invaluable, to find somebody who can support your desire to grow in what you're doing, especially if you're willing to listen. Because listening's hard when you think you've got something great, but it can be better. And if you find somebody you trust to tell you that, it works better.
Well, and I think too, like, knowing some of the craft and things that work, it's you sort of become your own co-writer sometimes too, because like you said, Sarah, you can sort of look at it more objectively and say, why do I get bored with this part? And I think, some of these rules or tools or whatever you want to call them, they're really just tendencies that have been in successful songs of the past. And I think we have to remember that the listener is actually the person who's finishing our song for us. Like, if it's not landing well with them, it doesn't matter what our intention was. It doesn't work, right? So there's so many things that go into it.
I like what Sarah said about if you have the tools, if you learn the tools, it can help you troubleshoot your songwriting as you're working on particular projects. It's also important, and going back to Sarah again, who co-writes a lot, you know, you go into a room, this is for definitely the newer songwriter, you go into a room with other songwriters and you have 4 things that you're knowledgeable about, and they've got 15 things that they're knowledgeable about, you're going to figure out really quickly that you're lacking in some things. And when you're co-writing, you're not always writing for yourself. And even me writing solo writes, I'm not a performer. I'm not writing for myself. So you have to ask yourself, who are you writing this for? And are they going to want a song that isn't following the rules or is following the rules? Odds are, if you're going to pitch a song to somebody down in Nashville or LA or New York or wherever, and you go in there with a song that isn't a structure that they recognize and is in some wacky rhyme scheme, or it doesn't really match up, or the rhyming scheme is the same even through the bridge, you know, your song's not going to get very far. You know, there are certain things, some of these rules are more important than others, and they are expected if you're doing certain things, like trying to get an artist to take your song. You better give them something they understand.
Good point. Nabil.
You know, the word theory and the word tools both have, in my head, become toxic in that sense. I think of it more like building your own map across music, if you follow what I mean. You're going out there and you're feeling your way, you're trying different things until you build a map of what works for you. And first it's a map, then it becomes a gut feel, because you go over that path so often that you go like, yeah, I know how to do this. I'm just going to put this over here because it fits there, you know about it. So to me, theory is a toxic word in that sense. It makes me go like, oh, I don't want to learn some more and work at theory. But you know, if you think about it as a map of how to walk the line of songwriting, and understand the landscape of songwriting, it's it's so much easier, you know, that way. It's a mental approach aspect, and then it also allows you to collaborate so much better, because as you guys were just discussing, it you can start seeing it in other people's work. You can start seeing what makes other people's work and, you know, really good for you. um, and then you can start giving feedback, you can start accepting feedback. I think one of the other things that I do want to bring into the discussion, apart from the theory aspect, I think is also the storytelling aspect. Like, how much of a song for each person, and I'm curious as to other people what they think about it, is storytelling, and how are they approaching storytelling. You know my views personally around screenwriting and storytelling, so you know, I'm curious to see how everybody else sees that aspect too.
So Nabil asked, you know, how do you guys approach storytelling in your songs? And I'll just throw it out there. And how do you approach storytelling?
Yeah, to the story element, to the story question, you know, in recent workshops and stuff that we've been focusing on, you know, the first verse is to kind of set the table, you know, who, what, where, and when. If you can kind of get through that in that first verse, then, you know, and again, not all songs are the same, not all songs are story songs or anything, but then in the chorus, you can really get to the emotional element of it. But it does help the listener. And if you can think of what the listeners, you know, well, how they're listening to it, if you set the table for them, it helps for the emotion later in the song.
Absolutely.
I feel like personally, I'm terrible with the storytelling side of songwriting, but thanks to some of the verse workshops you've been leading, Chad, I've been able to kind of rethink. I think storytelling had become kind of a loaded term in my head. And I felt like if I'm not telling a story in the conventional sense, that then I'm just not a storyteller kind of songwriter. So much of my songwriting is kind of first person sort of stream of consciousness. I'm just kind of like saying what's on my mind and how I feel. And I've started to, thanks to those workshops, recognize, you know, there's not a lot of character advancement in terms of like, then he said this, and then can you believe it? She showed up and this happened. But I'm able to take a listener from, you know, here's where I am and what I'm thinking about. And, you know, there can be an advancement of the time, maybe even going backwards in time. I remember this moment, or forward looking and saying, you know, I'm so concerned that I'm always going to feel this way. So there's so many things you can pull on or push on in terms of narrative that create that sense of story or momentum. And you, not to like touch back on where we just kind of came from, but it's like, you know, you don't need to do all the elements at one time. In fact, they would probably be inappropriate to like bombard your listener with everything you possibly can. So just letting yourself hone in on kind of like a microcosmic aspect of something, that can be a very powerful way to tell a story. The story inside of a story can be the most effective route sometimes.
Yeah, this is an area that I find myself continually struggling with and trying to make sure that the song continues to move along, that the second verse doesn't just restate the first verse, that there's something new introduced to the song each time, so that when you hear the chorus, it's following a different verse and it reverberates with some kind of a different meaning, some kind of a different angle on it because of the change in what's happening in the song from part to part.
Well, I would really agree with that. And Chad had in one of his workshops an example, the song "I Drive Your Truck," and it was all about, it's a country song and it's all about story progression, and it starts with you know, kind of the not least important, but it gets heavier as the song goes on. And that last chorus, it means a totally different thing than the first chorus because the story progression was set up within the song. So I agree that a real challenge is getting that second verse to be something different. So somehow to get to that point is a really good thing.
So how do you guys get to that point?
One thing that I like doing, if it's a story song, is to do some sort of storyboarding first, because I think it sucks to get to the end of the first verse and have nowhere to go. Like, you're like, well, we used up everything. We're done here. Time to go. But I think if you storyboard or just like write out, okay, this is the core of what we want to say. Well, how can we split that into parts so that this room's different than this room, that we can go somewhere with it. If you do it up front, it's, I mean, you can change it, but it's easier than trying to, you know, change the color of the room halfway through painting, which I've also done before. So.
Yeah, so sort of on that same angle as Sarah was just talking about, there's that Pat Pattison exercise where he does like the box model, where it's like box A, box B, box C. It doesn't mean that one is verse and one is chorus or whatever, but it's just what are the three stages of progression in your song? Where are you starting? Is it a pre-story? Then there's a second part, like the climax or something significantly changes, and there's a denouement at the end or whatever. It's kind of like the map of a novel where there's rising action, there's a climax, and then there's a conclusion. You can look at songs in the same way, but I just want to inject something else in this discussion, because story, I mean, especially as Richard was talking about it, if your lyrics aren't necessarily story based, as in this happened and then that happened and then X happened, there's also the story that you inject via the music, right? Because there's a rising action in the music, there's tension and there's release, and there's often what I refer to as like an energy map of your song. Like where does it climax, where does it fall down, where does it explode at its complete apex. One thing I realized recently is that a lot of songs that I like, the chorus isn't the high point of the song, the bridge is the high point of the song. Because a lot of songs, the bridge is what really exemplifies the song and pushes the energy to its highest point, and then it falls back down for the last chorus, which is kind of cool, right? And it's so to me, there's also the musical arc of the energy of the song, and where does that lead you? Because they always say too, if you can just whistle your melody instead of singing the words, does the song feel right? Just in terms of the melody and the lyric and the chord choices and the movement and the rhythm, then you got some legs to stand on for the lyrics to really be propped up.
You know, I'm going to take this back to the lyrical storytelling part, and some people call it mapping. I know when I started out songwriting, my stories were getting lost. They weren't in an order. They didn't really give all the facts like they should. And I read this article by Marty Dodson, and he calls it blueprinting. And it was like the light bulb went on for me. And then I was able to, you know, okay, verse 1 is going to accomplish what? Verse 2 is going to accomplish what? You know, the chorus is going to answer what question that I've set up in this verse. And how am I going to, in that blueprint, I'm going to figure out how to tie those things to the hook, you know, to keep everything pointed at that hook. And it's that blueprinting, I think, is really strong for a beginning songwriter, especially to keep your story on track and make sure you keep advancing that story in each verse, and that your chorus is, that those verses and everything is pointing towards the hook in that chorus.
I'm hearing that there's a strong element of pre-planning that goes into writing the song for some songs, not always. I follow that sometimes I just sit down and write, you know, but I also do this kind of a process of actually sometimes either writing a first draft, knowing that it's going to be a first draft and it's a outline rather than the actual song, or doing a vision board of some sort as well. So I can see that element. I'm curious, has anyone ever tried writing the end first? Because that's a screenwriting technique. You write the act 3 first, and then you write the act 2 and 1. So write the end first, the bridge and the chorus first, and then try writing the verses.
I did write a song once where I wrote the bridge first, but at the time I didn't realize it was the bridge. It was later on that I realized that was actually the bridge. So yeah, sort of.
I tend to start chorus first because I want to know how the hook lands. You know, I want to know it works before I invest in verses.
Yeah, true that.
Well, and I think that's one thing that I look at too when I'm writing is if I can't take the hook or the main idea and sort of recolor it a few different ways and make it sort of progress somehow, and that doesn't mean progression like chronologically, but it might be emotionally. If I literally, like Sarah, like you said, if you run out of juice in the first verse and there's no other juice to squeeze, like maybe that's part of another song. Maybe that's not a full song. Maybe that idea isn't worth running a full song through, because not every idea is worthy of a full song. You could force it, but is that really the right thing to do?
To Nabil's point a little bit, for myself, one thing when I get stuck with a song and I feel like I'm having trouble kind of getting verses to work, I almost every lyric little sheet on my phone I have, at some point there's this bold capitalized letters. It's an acronym now, but the acronym stands for what are you trying to say? And I always have to keep coming back, but that's kind of my way of keeping myself sort of end focused. And when I remember the thing I'm trying to arrive at is this, and then the song, when you know what you're trying to get, and I guess this is kind of the point in that screenwriting approach, is that when the ending is known, the song can write itself. It's just a question of you then back engineering, but you know where you're trying to get to. So it's very easy to make good decisions, to know which tools to use and to not use, because there's this clear end goal, and either you hit it or you didn't hit it. But when you kind of start at a beginning and go toward an end, sometimes you don't know where you're going to go. And it can, you know, what's that quote? If you don't know where you're trying to get to, then it doesn't matter which direction you take. But if you have a destination, there's many ways you might get there, but there's only one we made it.
Yeah, there's an exercise I usually go through at the beginning of a song. I used to write it out, but sometimes now I just think it in my head, is that this song is about X, X, Y, Z, right? And it's not a lyric, it's not going to be part of the song, but it's the anchor, like Richard was just saying. Like, it's the thing that everything points to, and then it's a lot easier to sort of parse that out into its individual sub pieces of that idea. And say, well, this part of it is a verse. This is really the emotional core of it. So maybe that's the chorus, and hopefully there's some progression from that. Because once you have that focus, then you can start to look at it from different angles, and often that's the way to get progression in your song.
I love looking at verses once they're written, because once you followed a progression, I like reading them through and asking, does that hurt enough? Can we make that hurt more? Can we make that feel more? Like, does it, when you sit and you read that line, you go, oh, yeah, like I feel it. If I don't, I try to rewrite it, like that little bit, like that's what I want to say, but is there more challenging, interesting, painful? I mean, sad song painful, but like, is there more joyful? Is there like a way that turns the knife a little bit more on that one line that could boost the song and make it from good to great? Like, how do you turn the little bits to make a good song great? I'm always kind of trying to figure that out. I don't have it all figured out, but usually if you get that core, like, oh my God, feeling like,
I love that point, Sarah, about every single piece has to matter. Because if you can take a line out of a song and it doesn't change the song, then that line doesn't need to be there. Then something else should be there instead. Every single line needs to matter kind of to that end product that you're trying to get to. Love that.
I like when Mike brought up that song by Lee Brice, "I Drive Your Truck." That's such a great country storytelling song. It was Song of the Year, so clearly it was a great country song. But I just think that that's such a great point about how you can write a verse and the chorus doesn't change, but the meaning of the chorus changes depending on how the story is told in that particular verse. And if you can do that, if you can write a great chorus and then have the verse change the meaning of the chorus and just make it stronger as the song goes on, wow, no wonder you got a #1 hit with a song like that in any genre.
I also very much resonate with what Sarah said about emotion. I think one element of a great story is that it will make you feel something. In fact, an element of a great song, of a movie, of a great, any artistic expression, it makes you go inside somehow. And essentially, I feel like we're trying to create empathy for what we feel and the stories that we want to share in the listener. And just driving that knife a little deeper, making that smile a little wider, is such an important element of sharing what you feel inside and creating that resonance in terms of empathy. So I really appreciate that comment. That was my one learning for today, by the way.
Awesome. Well, I think with that, let's wrap up for now. So thank you all for joining us on At Home Songwriting. This has been great conversation, and hopefully people watching will learn from the things that we've talked about, and hopefully we all learn something from each other as well. So hopefully we can do this again and keep getting deeper into the stuff that we talk about. So everybody, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Chad. Good to meet everybody.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for watching this video here at Home Songwriting. Hopefully this Songwriter Roundtable has been able to help you come up with new ideas or new thoughts as you think about your songwriting. Be sure to subscribe to this channel because I'll be providing you tips, techniques, tricks. We'll talk about how you can write better songs and how you can connect with other songwriters as well. So I'm Chad Shank. Thanks for joining us here at Home Songwriting.